Today's guest, Kelly Brush, spent much of her youth in sports. From gymnastics to lacrosse to soccer, she was always active and athletically involved. And her real passion was skiing, which she excelled at from the get-go, and which eventually landed her a spot on Middlebury College's alpine team, a lifelong dream forged in her Vermont roots and her family's history on the slopes. After an impressive first season and start to her second, Kelly's fate took a turn. During the fourth race of the year, the first half of which Kelly skied perfectly, she hit a patch of ice, caught an edge, and was thrown off the trail and into a lift tower, an accident that left her with 4 fractured ribs, a collapsed lung, and paralysis from the chest down. This was 13 years ago, and what has happened since speaks to Kelly's determination, heart, and spirit.
The idea of living life in a wheelchair was really daunting and really scary, and that was, like, this can't be me. How can that be who I'm going to be? And really a huge part of what helped me out of that was adaptive sports.
Today, Kelly is a skier, golfer, cyclist, tennis player. She's also a mother of 2. I spoke with her just before her second daughter was born. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner and, of course, the founder of the Kelly Brush Foundation, whose mission is, quote, to inspire and empower people with spinal cord injuries to lead active and engaged lives. Kelly shares with us her journey on this episode. Thank you for listening.
We started the Kelly Brush Foundation in 2006 after I had a ski racing accident. And really, we wanted to do a couple things. We wanted to make sure that an accident like mine never happened again. But then we also wanted to make sure that people with spinal cord injuries had access to adaptive sports. So when I had my accident, I fell and hit a lift tower and broke my back and had a spinal cord injury. So I use a wheelchair full time. And one of the biggest things that was helpful for me in my recovery and sort of feeling like myself again and getting back to my life was being able to be involved in adaptive sports and realize that I could still be an athlete. And we wanted to give other people that opportunity. So that's really what we've been doing. Now it's been 13 years since we started, which is wild to me. The biggest thing we do is we give grants to people to help them purchase adaptive sports equipment. And we've given over 750 grants around the country in the last 13 years. So it's been pretty awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, I've been following along, and it's exciting to see the progress that you've been making over the last few years. I mean, even since the beginning, but it seems like there's a lot of momentum lately.
Yeah, and that sort of that was kind of on purpose in the beginning. We were really small, and I was in college when I got hurt. I was a sophomore, so we were one event. We did a bike ride each year, and we would count the money and give it out after that, and then we would sort of sit dormant for 6 months or so before we planned the bike ride again and did that over again. And we did that until about 2013 or 14, when we had continued to grow pretty organically just through that one fundraiser. And we kind of got to a point where it was like, all right, well, we either need to decide now to just keep doing that and stay fairly small, or see if we can really grow. And we decided we wanted to try to grow. And so we've been adding more events and fundraising more. And so our growth really has come since 2014. And that's, when we've given away the bulk of our grants and everything too. So
that's terrific. And it seems like the community has grown too, not just the organization itself.
Yeah, for sure. Our community is really, we talk about the Kelly Brush Foundation community a lot, and that encompasses a lot of people. So it's a combination of grant recipients who are beneficiaries of what we're doing, but also people who are involved in the cause and have learned about it and, support what we're doing. And we've like I was saying, we have more events around the country. So we do events in Boston, Denver, San Francisco, and Vermont. So we have really good groups of people in all those areas that support us. So it really has turned into a great community, and it's really been cool to see it grow that way.
Yeah. I saw on your Instagram that guy hucking Corbets at Jackson.
That was insane.
Oh, that's insane.
He's totally nuts. People have sent that to me and they're like, do you want to do this? I'm like, no way. You've got to be kidding me.
Oh my gosh, I couldn't believe that. I mean,
yeah, he's a guy who we know well, and he does all sorts of crazy stuff like that. And that one was probably one of the craziest. But yeah, I mean, he's gotten it. It's been great how much that's been shared. Just because, it's awesome to bring awareness to adaptive sports and people doing that stuff, and that there's still people who are crazy out there who want to do that kind of thing, even though they're, using a monoski for something and in a wheelchair. So
yeah, that was incredible. And just back up for a second. So when you had your accident, you were a competitive skier in college, and you were in the middle of a race when it happened.
Yeah, so I was ski racing for Middlebury College, and we were racing in Massachusetts, and I was about halfway down when I somehow got spun around backwards, which I don't really know how that happened, but the last thing that I remember is going down backwards and thinking that I was going to hit the next gate, and that's really my last memory. And what happened after that is I got thrown off the trail. My skis sort of caught up and threw me off the trail. And I hit a lift tower that was not protected and broke my back. So my next memory really after that sort of memory of going down backwards and thinking I was going to hit the next gate is waking up. I was laying in a hospital bed in the intensive care unit at a local hospital, and I just come out of 10 hours of emergency surgery to realign my spine. And I woke up and my family was standing around me, and I had a tube down my throat to help me breathe, so I couldn't talk, and I was just saying, what happened? I have a couple little snapshot memories of being in the emergency room, but nothing really cohesive. And I don't really have any memories of going down in a sled or being in an ambulance or anything like that. But all that stuff happened. I just don't remember it.
Yeah, yeah. And you had grown up skiing competitively, and you're always active in sports throughout your life.
Yeah, so I was a big athlete. I mean, that was sort of who I was and what our family did, when I was a kid and growing up and everything. And I started skiing when I was, I think I was 2 when I got on skis, and I started racing when I was 7. And, skiing was a huge part of my life, but so were so many other sports. So, I played soccer and lacrosse in high school, but when I was younger, I tried, everything. We did, tennis and skiing and or swimming and softball and all sorts of things. So, and then we just did, I grew up in Vermont, so we were just an active family. I water skied on the lake in the summer, and we went hiking and camping and all that kind of stuff. So we were just an active family, and that was a huge part of my life. And it's not something that you really think about, you don't, that's sort of who you are, but you don't think about it because you kind of take it for granted that that's just what you do until, I had this accident, and all of a sudden I felt like, oh my gosh, can I not be an athlete anymore? Can I not do all these things? Obviously that was really hard for me at first. And then I realized I could do these things, and it didn't have to be taken away from me just because I had this accident.
And if you're willing, and I feel, almost even unworthy to ask you about these things. So if you don't want to talk about it, I understand.
No worries. Everything's good.
Yeah. Because you're so, and we can get into your TED Talk was amazing. And you're so, from my perspective, so courageous to even continue to let alone everything that you've done since, but to continue to revisit it, and that, people want to ask you about it, but it's also asking, I imagine it feels like asking a lot of someone to revisit this traumatic experience.
It is and it isn't. In a lot of ways, for me, well, I mean, at this point I've talked about it so much that I'm so used to it. But at the same time, it's sort of like, this happened, and while it was like certainly traumatic at the time, and there was a lot of emotions at the time, it just kind of, I came out of it in such a good place, and such an okay place, that it doesn't feel hard to think back on it. To think back on some of the things that I first thought about, and the first like misconceptions that I had are definitely sort of like, well, almost funny to me now, but those are the things to like get back into that mindset, is sort of like, oh my gosh, I was maybe kind of in a rough place. I was thinking about things like, was I ever going to be able to have kids at all? I was 19, so that was not part of my life, but still I was thinking about that. Like, can I still have kids? I had heard Christopher Reeve had died recently when I got hurt, and he had only lived a few years with his injury, and I was thinking, what's my life expectancy? Am I only going to live for another like 5 years? And all of those things are terrifying to think about. And now in hindsight, like, obviously I can have kids. I have one, and I have another on the way. And my life expectancy is the same as anybody else's would be. As I get older, I'll probably have some more health complications, but generally speaking, it should be all fine. So, there's a lot that goes along with this injury, but for me, it's kind of like not been a big deal. I guess that sounds funny, but it's like, it's almost nice to share my story, because then people, the more people can understand and learn about this kind of thing, the less sort of scary it will be for somebody else when the same thing happens. I don't know.
Sure. No, that was my hope, but then I realized, as I'm thinking about this conversation, that, maybe it's a big ask to have somebody go through this again, but I'm glad that, because my thought would be that it is so inspiring for everyone, to consider what you went through and how you came out of it, and how you dealt with it, because you mentioned these thoughts you were having at first. How long did it take for you to come out of that, and what was the driving force during those first, the initial phases of realizing the new reality?
Yeah, so with some of the things, it was just about education, right? Like, I worried about my life expectancy, and then they said it was the same, and I was like, okay, cool. Same thing with having kids, and they said, especially for women, men are a little bit different, but for women, it should be the same as if you hadn't had an accident. So, for a lot of it, it was just kind of the education part of it, and that helped those like initial fears of those big things. I was still, the idea of living life in a wheelchair was really daunting and really scary, and that was, like, this can't be me. How can that be who I'm going to be? And really a huge part of what helped me out of that was adaptive sports and learning about being active, and actually getting involved in that too, getting on a hand cycle for the first time and being able to go for a bike ride. It was so much more helpful even than just, like learning that that's a possibility, and learning and like seeing pictures or videos of it, like getting out there and being like, wow, this can still be part of my life. I can still be active. This is huge. And that just sort of set in motion just a sequence of events that I was like, okay, well, if I can still do that, then I can probably still ski. And I learned about skiing, and then I can still be part of the ski team at Middlebury, and I can still be with my friends, and I can still do all the same stuff that I did with my friends, and I can still go back to school, and all of those things that I was doing before and I was living before, that I could still do that stuff. And that really, really helped me, just get back to being me and my life. So I think that was a huge part of it. And all of that happened, I spent 2 weeks in a local hospital in Massachusetts before moving out to a rehab facility in Colorado that specializes in spinal cord injuries. Some of that education happened in Massachusetts. Most of it was at the rehab facility, where I was with other people that had similar injuries to me, and with, doctors and physical therapists and occupational therapists and nurses and everybody who have tons of experience with spinal cord injuries. And so, that setting was hugely important for me.
How long was it until you went back to college?
So I got injured in February. I was about a week into second semester. And so I ended up taking that semester off of school. And I basically was in rehab for essentially that whole semester. And then I went home and lived at home for the summer. And then I went back to school in the fall. So yeah, it was pretty quick that I was able to get back, which was definitely, in a lot of ways, it was kind of like a no-brainer for me. I never even considered not going back. I wanted to get back to my life, and my life at that time was being a college student. So there was a lot to learn and figure out and everything to get back to college and to learn how to live independently and everything. So that was a lot of work, I think, more so in hindsight than, at the time. But my goal right away was like, okay, I want to get back to college, and so that's what I did.
Yeah, so it sounds like your mind was in a good place in terms of being determined to just move forward with it right away.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, and a lot of people ask me about that, both, people who have had an injury like this, like, how did you stay so positive and how did you just move on? And I don't really have a good answer other than, I think it's just my personality. That's just sort of like who I am. And that was just what I was, how I was programmed at the time. And I don't know if it was, if you relate it back to like my competitive drive as an athlete or what, but in a lot of ways it was just, who I was and how I was set up to handle something like this. So I feel pretty lucky that was the case. I never got, really depressed or anything like that. It was just sort of like, okay, let's figure this out and move on and like get back to life.
Yeah. And in your talk, you mentioned that in rehab you're sort of learning to live for the first time, or what did you mean by that?
In a lot of ways, when you look at somebody, like when you look at me in a wheelchair, or if I look at me in a wheelchair right now, I just like, life isn't that hard and I just sort of do it. But to learn all of the little things of how to live in a wheelchair is actually kind of a lot. Like, it started with, how to sit up in bed. And that sounds like something so small, but I all of a sudden have no ab muscles that I can use. There was a lot that I had to learn, and it was, sitting up in bed and getting from my bed to my wheelchair and getting clothes on and taking a shower and all of those like little things that you totally take for granted before something like this happens. That's a huge part of rehab, and like why you go to rehab and why rehab exists, And then once you learn sort of like the basics, then you have to go home and like figure out how to actually, apply that to life at home, because you don't have like a hospital bed and stuff like that helps you sit up. So definitely, a huge adjustment of how to do really basic things.
What I loved about your TED Talk was how you broadened the conversation, and I think it was really nicely done and insightful about the premise of identity and what is your identity and what fuels your identity. If it's certainly not your name or your physical appearance, it's more about your behavior and your values and how you're behavior represents those values you claim to live by. But I think you really opened up an interesting discussion about, making judgments on people, and how you had a certain identity for yourself, and how that was changed with your accident, forced you to kind of consider that this wasn't going to define you and it wasn't your identity to begin with, but can you talk a little bit about that evolution?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, yeah, the TED Talk, I spent a lot of time on it trying to get the message right, because there's a lot of ways to kind of say that, but I think, you nailed it, that the idea really is, each person identifies and, feels defined in certain ways themselves, but people see them and perceive them and don't necessarily see that same thing. And how do we, readjust our thinking to try to take away those assumptions that we make when we first see people, and start to see sort of more who they feel like they are, and who they truly are, rather than just those snap judgments that we make. So, in a lot of ways, I really have learned that since having my accident and since living in a wheelchair. And, I don't mind when people stare at me or ask questions about my chair or why I'm in a chair or any of that kind of thing, because I feel like they're just learning about me, and they're curious and they're wondering, and I can educate them. And the more that I can, it doesn't happen often, but like every once in a while, I'll get somebody who, says hi to me in a way that they clearly think that I have some kind of intellectual disability as well as being in a chair and having a physical disability. And so I always reply with, hey, how are you? And like try to just talk normally back to them. And then all of a sudden they realize like, oh, whoops, I made this assumption, and that's not the case. But I try to in a as positive a way, show people who I am and let them make those assumptions too, and see what I feel like, who I feel like I am. And the more that I can just be me and show them that, the better, I think.
Yeah. And you say an awkward interaction is better than no interaction.
Yeah.
Which I love. And you did a good job, I think, of empathizing also with people, for example, people who stare at you, which could be taken as an offensive. But as you say, it's more, they're just trying to understand.
Yeah.
They see something unusual, then they're trying to understand.
Yeah.
And for you, for anyone, if there is that lack of understanding, having a conversation, even if it's an awkward one, at least you're getting somewhere instead of avoiding looking deeper into whatever it is that you're not understanding.
Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's a huge, part of learning about somebody, right? Is like you see somebody who's different in any way. And for me, my difference is obvious. I sit in a wheelchair instead of walk, and that's an obvious one. But you see, and the more people can see and understand and interact with me, the more they'll see me and not just my chair. And the more that we can do that with everybody, somebody who's different than you, or, even somebody who's exactly the same as you.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say.
They're going to be different in so many ways, even if there's somebody who's, also in a wheelchair and my same gender and age and race and all of that stuff, like we're not the same. We're still different in plenty of ways. So all those interactions, though, just sort of open up your understanding of other people and can broaden sort of our perspectives. And I think that's, always a good thing. I would so much rather somebody ask me a question than wonder. And, I do a lot of work with the Kelly Brush Foundation, but I'm also a pediatric nurse practitioner. So I interact with kids every day. And I love their reaction to me and the honesty that they have. And sometimes I walk in and instantly they say, "Why are you using a wheelchair?" And some parents, immediately say, don't ask that. That's rude. You're not supposed to ask that. Or they're like, oh, I'm so sorry. And some parents are like, yeah, you're curious. Like, go ahead and ask. And I really love that, And I always try to say like, no, I'd rather answer. I want them to ask. I don't want them to be curious and not know. I actually the other day had a kid say, I went through like most of my visits. So I'd been with him for, several minutes anyway, like maybe 5 or 10 minutes. And then I can't remember what happened, but he said, why does your cart not have a steering wheel? And I was like, that's a really good question. I don't know. I was like, I don't know how to answer that. I was like, well, I steer with my hands. But it was awesome because he was there and like thinking about my chair in a different way, and his understanding of something that has wheels also has a steering wheel. And so he was curious, why mine didn't and how it worked if it didn't. So I love that. I think it's really awesome. And, his perspective and everything. And his parents were like, yeah, he loves cars.
I love that it's the purity of curiosity in kids is something that we should all take a cue from. Because they're trying to understand things they haven't been told for whatever reason why adults get uncomfortable asking questions about people. That's beautiful. And I'm glad you brought it up about, you made a point about how it's not just about people who are different from you that we avoid trying to understand. We can easily just kind of fall asleep or go into autopilot and not really make any effort to understand people at all that we don't know. And so again, what I appreciated about what you're saying is that it's a great reminder to, think about how you are approaching people that you don't know or that you don't understand or that are different than you, and think about how you're the type of energy that you're bringing and how they're seeing you. And it's an interesting point that you're making about how we engage with each other at all. So I thought it was really great, and I love how you said everyone has a story. I think that is such a simple line, but it covers so much.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's so true, right? Like we don't, once you think about it, it's obvious, but it's definitely something that you don't always consider, and especially when you're like, grumpy at somebody who like cut you off driving or something, and you're like, well, that's unnecessary. It's like those little interactions that you like, who knows what's going on in that person's life and why they're doing what they're doing. So
yeah. I know we're all operating out of our own little mini window of perspective, and it's so easy to forget that there's a broader one that we can adapt if we just change the outlook a little bit and open the mind up.
Yeah, totally. I know it's a really interesting thing to think about and to keep in mind, and it's like it's hard to do. Like I'm certainly no expert on it. I'm not perfect about that, but the more I've definitely since my accident and my injury, I have a different perspective on certain things. And
you talked also about the feeling of, being an inspiration, and how some folks in your community say, well, why am I inspirational if I'm just going about my life? Versus you're kind of saying, well, I'm doing this anyway, and if you find inspiration from that, that's fine. But maybe you can talk a little bit about, how that feels.
Yeah, this is, the idea of being an inspiration. It's funny, you'll see this pop up in the disabled community on like, blogs and things like that, from time to time, and I've always had mixed feelings about it because there's definitely a group of people who say, don't call me an inspiration just because I'm living my life. And there's probably that quote, like, that's probably like the title of a blog somewhere out there. But, the way that I think about it is a little bit differently. And I did have this hurdle, this accident that happened, and I've done a lot since. And I'm not doing, when I say I've done a lot, I'm not doing those things to like impress people. I'm doing those things just because, that's how I want to live my life. And, that's what I want to do. I wanted to go back to college and I wanted to learn to ski and I wanted to do these sports and, I wanted to become a nurse practitioner. I want to have a family. All of these things I'm doing just because I want to. But, I understand that in some ways I've had more to overcome, and there's certainly things that are a little bit harder for me to do than other people. And if someone looks at that and is impressed by it and thinks it's inspiring and it motivates them to work harder in some area of their life or change their perspective on something, I think that's great. I think that's awesome. And I don't take offense to it, and I don't feel like, well, why should you look at my life and think that it's any different, because it is a little bit different, and that's okay. And I'm happy to be that person for somebody, even though that's not my goal and my intention.
Yeah, and you're going about your life how you want to, either way, just like anybody else is. And what you've done would be inspiring and admirable, regardless. So, what's going on now with the Kelly Brush Foundation?
The bulk of what we've done up to this point has been to help people with spinal cord injuries purchase adaptive sports equipment. So that is hand cycles and monoskis and sports wheelchairs, so things like tennis and basketball and rugby chairs, all of those sorts of things. And that equipment is really expensive. It's anywhere from $1,000 or $2,000 on the low end up to $10,000 or more. So it's hugely expensive. So, that's been sort of the bulk of what we've done. And we've started we're growing now at a pace that we still have a huge demand for those programs, but we're also trying to find new ways to get more people involved in sports, because what we really believe is, in a lot of ways this was born sort of out of my experience, but that people learning about sports and getting involved in sports opens up so many other doors as well. So it's not just sports for the sake of being active and doing, living an active lifestyle. But once you do that, it opens up your perspective and you learn that you can still be a part of a community, you can have friends, you can go back to school, you can work a job, you can have a family, all of these things. And so we really feel like the importance of sports is that. And so we've been trying to find new ways to get people involved in adaptive sports. So we're one of the things that we're working on right now is coming up with a platform that can get people involved in sports, both just understanding what's out there, but also, having more opportunities to try sports and try, different activities earlier on in their injury. So that's been really exciting and something that hopefully we'll be, progressing with over the next several months. And hopefully that's going to open up, a lot more people to what sports can offer. And I think that's going to be really important. And then continuing with the programs that we have and getting more people involved in sports. So it's been really great to see the demand for our programs. And, this started because of my experience and getting back into sports. And it's amazing to see, I'm not alone. I wasn't the only one who felt this way. And there are so many people out there who really, really benefit from what we're doing and the equipment that we're able to provide for them.
That's amazing. And I've been thinking about this more and more over the last few years. And I grew up, playing sports, team sports as well, and always enjoyed them. But the value and what I learned from them becomes more and more apparent every day as an adult who does not play team sports anymore.
Right.
It's not about the game. It's about, there's so much more, as you were just saying. It transcends the physical activity.
For sure. And that's something that I never really thought about or, internalized in any way when I was, a kid or a teenager doing sports. But certainly as I got older and started to, the prospect of being active and being able to participate in sports was taken from me, or so I thought. And then once I had it back, just thinking about what that means, and it really does, you start to realize how incredible that is, and the opportunity you had. And for most of us, it's when we were kids, and teenagers, that's when you're playing team sports and all of that. And yeah, you're right on the, as an adult, you're not doing that nearly as much, but what you take away from it and what you are able to have through your whole life because of those experiences you've had is awesome and incredible.
What did it feel like when you got back on the mountain? Because it wasn't that long after, right?
Yeah, so I had my accident in February, and I was back skiing the next, basically Thanksgiving, so November of the next year. So less than a year after my accident, I was back skiing. And for me, I always loved skiing, and I was never mad at the sport. I was never, sad about it or anything like that. I guess I was sad that I wasn't doing it, but I was never, mad or frustrated or felt like I didn't want to ski anymore. I always wanted to get back and ski because both, firstly, just the activity of skiing, but maybe even more important was the community that I had there. And, my family and friends that were there, and that I wanted to be a part of still. And I didn't want to be at the bottom in the lodge, watching from there. I wanted to be up on the hill and participating and be part of it. So, it was a huge goal of mine to get back skiing. It was really hard to learn. So to learn how to monoski was a lot harder than I expected. And when I first got up on the hill, it was not really skiing. It was a lot of falling and just managing and figuring it out. But, over the next several years, I got better and better. And, now I'm skiing at a level that, I can ski anything with anybody, and as long as the conditions are okay. And I'm fully a part of that community that I always was and that I always wanted to be a part of. So it's been awesome for me.
How do you balance it all? Like, you're a mother, you're a nurse, and you're running an organization. How do you do that?
I have no idea. I don't know. This is just sort of how things have evolved for me. And in a lot of ways, it was right after my accident, I went back to school. After I graduated from college, I decided to go back to grad school and then became a nurse practitioner. And during all of that time, the Kelly Brush Foundation was sort of growing slowly. And then the last few years, when the KBF has really been growing faster, it's definitely been something that I've had to actively manage to balance my time so that I'm not getting too overwhelmed either way. Either with not doing enough with the KBF or feeling like it's taking over my life. I've found a balance, I think, that works pretty well right now. I had been working 4 days a week as a nurse practitioner and 1 day a week at the Kelly Brush Foundation. And then this past summer, I was feeling like I just couldn't. There was more at the Kelly Brush Foundation that I wanted to do that I couldn't do in a day. And so now I'm doing 2 days there and 3 days as a nurse practitioner. So that's been a change for me, but a really nice change and a good balance. And that also means that my daughter's in daycare 5 days a week, which, is kind of what it is. But I love having the time that I do get to spend with her in the mornings and evenings and on the weekends. And, we've been able to find ways to balance that. And there's so many working parents out there that I know have that same sort of, dilemma of how much time you get to spend with your kids versus working. And, I think that over time it's always going to change, and there'll be a time, once we have the second baby, it'll be really interesting to see how I'm feeling. I'm sure I'll be feeling very overwhelmed for a little while.
Yeah.
But that's going to be another adjustment and a change, and we'll just kind of figure it out as we go. So
Yeah. Yep. That's all you can do.
that's all you can do. Yeah. And so far it's worked out okay. So
Yeah. Yeah. Good. And you're due soon, right?
yeah, in 3 weeks. 3 weeks.
3 weeks with your second child, and your daughter's 3. What's her name?
Her name is Dylan.
Dylan. Gotcha.
Yeah.
So
So-
it'll be a family of 4 pretty soon.
It will be a family of 4. Yep, exactly. And one crazy dog.
Yeah. Well, I'm excited for you, and thank you again for giving me an hour of your night with all the stuff that's going on for you.
Absolutely. I'm happy to do it. And I appreciate,
Yeah.
It's always nice to share what we're doing in different venues. So it's cool to do that.
That's it for this episode. This is Ty McDonald, your host, and thank you for listening to the Jalapeno Podcast. That was Kelly Brush of the Kelly Brush Foundation. You can find out more at kellybrushfoundation.org. KELLYBRUSH foundation.org. Thank you also to Aaron Mason for the sound design and CF Watkins for the illustrations. Thank you to Roos for the music. Stay tuned for the next episode. We'll see you soon.